there. Welcome back to another episode of Weirdly Wired Women podcast. Today, I have Sadie Sham Higgins with me. She's an entrepreneur and a author working on her first book, and it's a transformation about a transformational memoir about becoming yourself, and that's why I wanted to have her here. I've known Sadie for a little while and seen her evolution through a couple of different businesses and a couple of different interests and things that she wants to do, and this transformation one I think is very important for women in general as they start to learn about themselves more, but also if you've been in a traditional career where you've had to mask, whether because you're a woman or neurodiverse or any of the reasons that you don't get to be yourself, how do you figure out what yourself is? Because everybody says, be your authentic self.
Mm-hmm. So yes, thank you for the intro, Kristen. I love that you said you've known the past years and you've seen some of the transformation. And so you get why this has been a big deal in my life. And so I think your question that you just asked was the very question I was asking myself. And I asked myself that question, who am I, a couple of years ago? And it felt like a couple of things why I wanted to ask that question. It felt like I was living on autopilot. Like I was going through the motions of my day. I was just like making ends meet, making sure the kids were taken care of, making sure dinner was ready, dishes were done, things like that. Even though I was working on a startup at the time, it was like work, take care of the kids, take care of meals, and end of the day, rinse, repeat. Mm-hmm. And so I remember a specific day where I couldn't catch my breath. And now that wasn't unusual. I've done that in my life before. I'm sure we all have kind of been like, oh my gosh, I'm going to breathe today because, today was a tough day kind of thing. But there was more to it than that. I realized that I was always kind of a silly, let's find the light, always find the light kind of person. And I wasn't that anymore. I was struggling to smile on a daily basis. And things really felt like I was meeting my day-to-day with resistance. And so there was constant pushback. And so I stopped and I said, like, what am I doing? Mm-hmm. What am I doing? What is the life that I'm living for? What is it about? And how can I live life with less resistance and more joy? And you're right. Everyone says, like, who are you? You got to just be yourself.
Right.
And I wasn't sure what that was anymore.
Right.
So I went down a rabbit hole of trying to be like, well, I'm going to nail this. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to lead with, I'm going to perfect it. Like I tried to perfect everything in my life, which I realized was part of the problem. I think it's a very philosophical question that is difficult to answer, but there surely are answers. And I think the hard part about it is it requires time, it requires quiet space, and it also requires the knowledge of knowing that it won't always stay the same.
Right.
We all have core values within ourselves that don't change much, but life is ever changing. And so we must change with it. Right. So that's part of it too.
Yeah. That openness to change and that openness to be curious about why you believe what you believe, or, I mean, even those core values, like, some of them might not be your core values. You might be carrying something with you that doesn't really resonate with you. And you kind of have to examine everything. And it's hard to do when there's so much conditioning and there's so much societal pressure and then again, it's all just figure out who you are and be your authentic self. And then after years and years of acting like whoever you thought you were supposed to be, unpacking all of that and even experimenting a little bit just to see what feels right. It's challenging and it can be a little scary and it makes you very vulnerable.
Oh, it's definitely vulnerable. And so I'm going to preface it with, you're going to figure out some uncomfortable truths about yourself. And that's really cool. Even though it's really hard to accept, change isn't easy. And when you realize what some of those conditionings are, it's eye-opening. But then you kind of are like, well, where do I go from here?
Right.
So start with the question of, who are you? I actually asked my kids that to see what a child would say. And I feel like most of us, including children, answer with nouns.
Mhm.
I am a boy. I am a son and a brother. I'm a friend. And I feel like that's kind of how we answer as adults as well. Who are we as a noun? What is our occupation? That kind of thing. So that's a great place to start. But I wanted to dig deeper. What are my skills? What are my adjectives? Am I courageous? Am I erratic? Do I cave under pressure? You know, all of these things that I can look at and then say, do I like that about myself, or is there room to change?
Mhm.
And then, you know, what lights me up? What makes me passionate? Is it something that I've been told over the years I should be doing? Or is it something I really loved in the past? So that's where I started. I tried to get rid of, I wrote down all the nouns, and then I looked back from when I was a really small child at the things that I was innately. And now I'm saying innately, but we are all preconditioned, right? So
Right.
are you born into a traditional family? Are you adopted? There's so many variables here that it's almost impossible to to like get rid of those variables, but they are part of who you are. So I think who you are is what you like about yourself. Who you ultimately are is what you really like about yourself and what you want to work on to be the best version of yourself that's ever changing. And you may not get to the best ever,
Mhm.
but you're the good enough for now, that there's no resistance. So what I did was I started as a child and I started writing down and meeting the past versions of myself. Dr. Paul Conti was on Andrew Huberman's podcast a few weeks ago when he had like a 4-part series. I didn't watch all of them, but one of them in particular struck me, and it was self-care is self-realization. And so with self-realization, it's going back to these past versions of yourself and realizing the canon events that really shaped who you were and who you are now. And do you sit well with that? Do you like that? Can you change that? And so I feel like some of that comes with some trauma. Were there traumatic events in your past? What were they? And so I think when you look back at some of the things that you are now, it's because you were holding on to some armor that you needed to have when you were younger, for society to see you a certain way, for your parents to see you a certain way, for your friends to see you a certain way and really like you. You kind of fit that mold, but you're putting up some sort of guard that doesn't come off ever unless you stop and say, wait a second, I don't need that anymore. And that's what Brene Brown talks about. She talks about putting on that armor, and it kind of weighs you down as you get older until you realize, I don't need it. I can take it off. And so that's where I started. And I did that through journaling prompts. And I met myself at 5 years old, at 10 years old, at 15 years old, until, you know, through college until now. And so much happens during that time. And it feels good when, you know, society and the loved ones around you say, oh, good job. Good job.
Right.
I love that about you. I really like that. And it's nice to receive that feedback. But a huge part of finding out who I am was letting go of validation. So do I need validation from other people, or can I accept a validation from just myself? That's really hard.
Yeah.
That is really hard, especially when you're working to become an author, when you're working to connect with other people who need what you have, right? Because society right now is about likes, clicks, comments, and shares.
Right.
And if you don't have a lot of that, you can tend to feel like, okay, nobody cares about this. But maybe they're not seeing your message.
Right.
So I think one of the big things that's changed is I'm going to put out what I deem to be really important that I think could help someone else. The right people will find it.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't, that's okay. If they do, and we get to have a conversation, fantastic. But I can't live and die by likes, comments, and shares.
Right.
And so if you think about it, our whole lives have been likes, comments, and shares.
Right. Yeah. Just not necessarily the electronic ones, but yeah.
Yeah. So so it has been pausing to take time and writing down, for instance, the things that have lit me up over the years. When I'm in a certain space, when I'm at a certain place, when I'm writing something specific, how do I feel? If it feels like I'm sliding down like a water slide on a summer's day, then I know that's for me. If it feels like I'm squeezing in between like a thin wall, that's not for me. And so it's important to find out those moments of what lights me up, because that then becomes who you are, which also then becomes part of your purpose.
Right.
And I don't know that we talk about purpose until we are adults. The kids don't care what their purpose is. They know that they know
it's
that
just to have fun.
Right. Like why am I here in this world, and what am I supposed to be doing? Can be really heavy and daunting. And I mean, I remember when I met you, Kristen, and I was working on Gleam, and it felt like I was walking through that tight wall, and it didn't feel right, because, you know, my whole life I had been told, have your own business, be your own boss. That's the way to go. And that is great for some people. And I did want those things, but maybe not in the way that I thought I needed them.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I'm my own boss right now because I'm a writer, and because I have little side things that I do. And I hate to say little side things because they take time and they take effort. But yeah, just stopping to think, why am I doing what I'm doing right now? Which is also a privilege. I think that's a privilege. And so finding your purpose can be daunting for people who aren't quite sure what that is. But I think sitting and pausing and working on yourself and revisiting that, because it's not like a one and done.
Right.
This is who I am. I'm always going to be this way.
Right.
You know, like to test you. And it certainly has tested me over the past couple of years. And so I remember going to bed kind of saying like, okay, universe, I'm ready. Tell me what it is. Like, tell me what my purpose is, because I'm really struggling here, especially because, and I know you will resonate with this, I'm a multi-passionate kind of person.
Right.
And I think it's harder for people like us. Do you feel that way?
Oh, definitely. And but I've been jotting down notes while you were talking. Just so many things that I was thinking about. And first, just so people know, so when you mentioned Gleam, that was, you had a business idea for an app, and you were working on that, and that's when we met. And that made me think about how it's good to try ideas, but not every business idea is going to be the right one for you. It might be a great business idea, but it might not be the right one for you. And before that, you had several businesses, and you've gone back to that. Your little side thing that you kind of dismissed is not. I mean, this is a business that you've had and you grew, and it kind of had to take a backseat during the pandemic. But it's certainly not this little thing. I think we do tend to dismiss ourselves a little bit. And then, so two things I wanted to go back to. One was that you had mentioned childhood trauma, and I just want to, I'm going to keep saying this just because it might be obvious to other people, but it was not obvious to me, that trauma doesn't have to be a big, horrible thing. Like, and it doesn't have to mean anybody was specifically abusive or harmful, or that you were traumatized in a way where you had to flee your home, or like, it doesn't have to be that big thing. Now, certainly that is trauma and that does affect a lot of people, but it could be really not being seen for who you are, not being diagnosed with something that you needed help with, anything that those things, anything that made you have to put on that armor. So it doesn't mean that it has to be something that was purposefully done to harm you. And for a long time, that's just what I thought trauma was. I was like, I had a pretty basic childhood, nothing traumatic happened. But now when I look through it through that lens, I'm like, oh, except that I had a lot of anxiety about who I was supposed to be and who I was pretending to be. And that didn't come from anybody trying specifically to hurt me. That was just kind of in the ether, but it did shape a lot of stuff, and I'm having to unpack and unlearn that. And that is a trauma to overcome. So just mostly because it was an aha moment for me that not all trauma was like required helicopters and Red Cross and, but political or police intervention or anything. But the other thing that you said early on that I absolutely loved was that when you're figuring out what's true about your authentic self, is that it's what you love about yourself. Because we're so often told about the things that, we get criticized for, or, what are your biggest weaknesses and how are we going to solve those weaknesses? And let's change all the weaknesses about you. And just that idea of embracing what it is that you love about yourself as who you are. And you don't have to, we all have weaknesses, but why does everybody need to spend so much time talking about their weaknesses? Why not just embrace what you love and what your strengths are and what you want to be doing and what you want to be projecting, and play to that. And yeah, probably you'll have to deal with some stuff that you don't want to deal with. I mean, life isn't going to be all, rose fields and whatever. But yeah, I just love that idea of while you're trying to figure this out, that you look for the things that you love about yourself. Or even, I mean, that might be strong depending on how much baggage you're carrying. You might not really love anything about yourself. Start with what you like about yourself, or that you like doing. And because this is a process and it's not going to happen overnight. And, you're not going to figure out every bit of your authentic self.
You're not
all at once. And
no, life tests you. And as it tests you, you figure out more and more of who you are. And instead of saying like, oh, I hate myself in this moment, you can say, well, this is who I am. I'm going to give myself grace. Is there something I can work on? There's a difference between wanting to get rid of all your weaknesses and saying, ooh, I'm really realizing this about myself. And I know that I can put in some effort to be better on this front. Am I perfect? Absolutely not. So for instance, I am very reactive. I don't respond well when it comes to like issues within the family. If my kids aren't, ready when I say, come on guys, what are you doing? Instead of being like, okay, I see you're having a rough morning. Do you think we can get it together within 2 minutes? And so that's been in my bones and in my DNA since I was a small child. Is that going to change overnight? No. Have I made small adjustments? Yes, but that's something I want to be better at. So it's important for me to do. Now, am I going to be a quiet, timid person ever? No. No, that's not going to happen. I don't want to change that about myself, but I can accept the fact that sometimes I'm a little too loud. Sometimes I'm a little too excitable, and that's part of myself that I know can be a little bit much, but I'm okay with that because that's who I am. And so friends and my loved ones will either love that about me or they'll move on, and that's important. It's important to recognize the things that aren't so great, but that you love anyways.
Right. the things that aren't great that you love anyways, and the things that aren't great, like you said, that you want to work on for yourself or for your family. Like you are deciding, I don't want to be as reactive as I am, but it's not because anybody is coming at you and telling you this is who you are supposed to be.
Right,
It's
exactly.
a decision that you've made for yourself. And I think that's that can be really challenging, especially if you grew up not being able or just kind of lived in a situation or work life or any kind of life where you weren't allowed to make any decisions for yourself. Like those things take practice, you know. It's it's not easy to just start doing if you've never been able to do it. And so I like your idea of just kind of journaling, kind of just things from your past or things that you want to reconnect to. And it doesn't have to be a handwritten journal. If you are a voice memo person or like crafty or artistic, or just kind of trying to tap into those feelings and trying to get closer to that.
It's almost too like you can just tell yourself. So if I'm in a moment where I'm like, ooh, I overreacted just then, I can say, okay, that's you. I know you want to work on that, but just take a moment for, give yourself some grace and then move on. And the same with if I'm in a space where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I feel like me, like this feels so much like me. I just make a mental note of like, this is me. This is me. When I am at a concert and I am around everyone else and they have their phones up with the light on, that's heaven. That is like heaven to me. And so I know that is a huge part of my life. And that's what lights me up and brings me joy. And I don't have to write that down.
Right.
That's a feeling that can't be taken away, And so I feel like everyone has that in their lives in some way. It doesn't have to be like, I feel like I'm in heaven right now, but wow, I really am so happy in this moment. And what is that moment? Is that just family? Is that going on a vacation? What does that feel like to you? I think also too, when it comes to purpose and who we are, I feel like everyone, or at least America, maybe it's the world, but I feel like specifically in America, it needs to be big.
Right.
You need to have a big purpose. And so I kind of got stuck on that too. Like my purpose needs to be grand. I need to be out here changing lives and saving people.
Well,
that's
right.
exactly. But
Right. And if you're going to own a business, it has to be the biggest, and you have to like end up at the top and be on the cover of all these magazines, and you like.
Yes, 100%. And I'm not even kidding you. That is why I felt so burnt out starting Gleam, because I foresaw myself on the cover of Forbes. And I wanted to be Sarah Blakely. And I also wanted to be Mary Poppins at the same time during a pandemic while renovating our home. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. But, stopping to realize, one of my favorite quotes from Mother Teresa is, you want to change the world, start in your own home. And the thing I love about that is, to my knowledge, there is no specificity on how many people are in that home. It could just be you. You want to change the world, then look within yourself first, or within, your children or your spouse or whatever it is. Just, take care of you and the people around you. And that can be enough. That can be.
Right.
So like seeing, what are my ideals about who I am and who I want to be? Is it something grandiose, or is it just to be content? That's important.
Yeah. It's often underrated. Like,
yeah, it really
which is why we all think we have to be productive every second of every day.
Oh yeah.
It's funny, this weekend.
Yeah.
I happened to have Joe took Henry out Sunday afternoon. And so I had the whole afternoon with the house to myself, except for the dog, but she doesn't really require a whole lot. And that doesn't, I'm home all day, like during the week, but I'm working and like doing other stuff. So it's not like I'm, have free time when I'm home. And so this was like just time. And then I was like, I felt that pressure, like, oh, this would be a great time to like organize this closet or do this thing that it would be convenient not to have other people at home. But I was like, but last week was busy and Henry was sick and I had like all these things going on. And I was like, I don't need to do that. I can, actually, take care of my skin today. And I can work on this little craft thing that I've been wanting to try. And I can just I can listen to this book while I do, like, I can just have a day that is about recharging and it doesn't have to result in anything that I'm like, I accomplished this today. And even knowing that is important, there is still that like, I should have.
Mhm.
I mean, it's so hard to let go of that pervasive, but what did you get done? Like,
What did you move the needle today, Kristen?
yeah, right.
Like, did you move the needle?
And I'm like, I don't even know what needle. Like,
Are we talking
yeah.
there? Is that what we're talking about?
But yeah, and and one of the things that I've, because from having a business, that there's always something that you could be doing. And so Joe, usually when he gets home, like he knows that my days get more disrupted than his, because if something happens at school, I have to go deal with that, or, just a lot of this other stuff that I take care of during the day. So he'll always ask me when he gets home, he's like, well, do you have any work you need to do now? And my answer is always, I always have work to do, but I'm not going to do anymore right now. Like I'm done for the day. Like sometimes I'll work in the evening if there's really something I need to do, but like setting that boundary and honoring my own boundary for myself is still something that I struggle with, because again, I should be burning the candle at both ends and hustle. And
yes. Sometimes I feel like, I love my country. I love America, but I feel like sometimes Italians get it right. Like let's just, have a nice little snack and chill out for a minute and then go about your kind of thing. But we do have culture. And
how can we start the siestas in the daytime? That would be great.
That's what, thank you. I was like, there's this word for it. We need a siesta.
Yes.
But a moment to recharge, because that's so important. Being creative and even just being productive requires relaxation. It requires time to relax. And we're on this, wellness kick in our society right now, which is amazing. But again, as this wellness kick, everyone's trying to nail the shit out of healing and wellness. And, I'm going to be best at this. I'm going to do, 17 things today on my wellness. Meanwhile, you're burnt out from wellness.
Right.
So
yes, your wellness to-do list is almost as long as your other to-do list. And now, yeah.
Yes.
Like,
so
I can't sleep tonight because I have to meditate.
Yes, exactly. Right. So changing the narrative around that, because, I feel like as society changes, we're changing along with it. And whether that's with new technology or like we just talked about with, the wellness kick or hustle culture, because they're still kind of hand in hand, we're hustling to be well, that, it is important to just kind of be in a bubble for a minute and just what do I want? Drown out the noise of what society wants and what your, parents want and what your siblings want, what your spouse wants, and just pause. What do I want right now? Because ultimately it is a selfish thing to do. And I think that's why people don't really want to do it, because it seems selfish. But you at your best is helpful for everyone else in the family, in your lives, in your job, whatever it is. But it's very hard to find the time to do that. So again, no pressure to find yourself.
Right.
If you're content in this moment, don't do it. But if you're feeling inspired to kind of say, okay, I'm going to just do a check-in. That's what this week or next week, I'm just going to do a check-in and I'm going to say, what lit me up this week? What did I not like this week and why? Like, how did that not resonate with me?
Right. And can I do anything about that?
Can I let that thing go? Do I never have to do that thing again? Because if you keep, then don't, yeah, it's just a simple check, and it doesn't have to be anything crazy. You don't have to change who you are right away, but there is some history involved. If you want to look inward and you feel like you're on autopilot and you want to make some changes or feel more aligned with who you are deep down, it's going to require a little bit of a history lesson to go back and say, like, where did this start?
Right.
Are there things I can let go? Do I not need to do this anymore? And what can I do instead? And that's really the cut and dry of it. And whether or not you're doing that by talking to yourself in your head or writing it down or, making a voice note, whatever that is a really good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like, it's this cultural, like, belief that if you're not producing, you're being lazy, I think. And then also just the idea that, that whole selfish narrative. And I think women get it far more than men, but, because, well, I mean, you can just look at it in anything where if there's a mom and her kid and anything happens, they're like, what was the mom doing? Was she going to the bathroom? Did she leave her kid? Like, it's like, you can't ever do anything for yourself. You have to, and that's not sustainable. But that's the narrative that we get and that we think, so that if we are taking time for ourselves, it's selfish. And so it almost seems like some of that, the self-care that we're, performing, like, to say, okay, I am taking care of myself, but it's, again, because it's performative and because you're trying to, like, check off the to-do lists, it's, it isn't doing what it's supposed to do for you. And it isn't really the selfish care that you need, because it's not for you. It's for this performance of, I am doing all of the things that people are telling me I need to do.
Yeah. It becomes a checklist and a task that you have to do. And there's definitely no relaxation in that.
No. Yeah, I've tried some of the self-care things, and, because some of it I do think is valuable, but it really, what it comes down to for me is just when I, like, for me, self-care is just taking some time to do what I feel like doing. Like, that it doesn't have to be a specific thing, and it doesn't have to result in anything, and it doesn't have to be anything, like.
And that's you. Isn't that great? That's you. You're saying, I'm just going to do what I want to do right now. That's you. Those are the things that you either like or that bring you an interest. And that's really cool.
Yeah. Cause I mean, the other thing that I found when I wasn't, and I certainly don't do this all of the time. I'm certain that, I'm human, and I also have that residual, like, I should be more productive and I should get these things done. And, my mother's house was spotless all the time, and mine is definitely not. Oh God, I totally forgot where I was going with this.
Do that all the time.
I went on too many tangents to get around to my point, and now it's gone. It'll come back.
And you're talking about other people in your family and things like that. And I think that's what's so difficult too, is when you feel an internal shift happen, and then you're reacting or responding to things differently than you normally did. And then you have Thanksgiving with your whole family or Christmas with your whole family. And they're like, what's the matter with you? Or, they expect you to say or do something that you used to do, but that's no longer serving you. So it's very interesting to take that with a grain of salt and to just continue being who you are without that societal influence. And I think also it is helpful to hear what people have said about you in the past and look at it. So I'm going to use an example. Years ago, it was my brother's birthday, and I stepped in on a surprise for him in an area where maybe I shouldn't have. I thought I was doing the right thing. After the birthday, he said, "Sade, you're kind of a martyr." And it hurt my feelings at the time. But I looked back on that comment and I was like, you know what? What was I doing that for? Who did I think I was helping? Maybe I am a little bit of a martyr. And realizing that about myself and saying, I don't need to step into certain situations that don't involve me or serve goodness for anyone was super important. And I realized I did that a lot. I interfered. I stepped in thinking I was doing the right thing, but really just making a mess of everything. And so that is a hard truth that was uncomfortable for me to sit with. But man, it feels so much better to not be doing those things. And my family's happier for it too. So it actually worked out in the end. But I think sitting with some of those uncomfortable truths and saying, yeah, you know what? That has been who I've been. Sometimes I think I know it all. Let me preface this with, I do not know it all. I am not an expert on this subject. This is just what has worked for me. Mm-hmm. And going into things full throttle and thinking I'm going to nail this. I'm going to, be a wellness expert. I'm going to find myself. I still don't know who I am fully, but I know a lot more about who that is than I did a couple of years ago. And I will tell you, I went in head first, guns blazing. I'm going to get this. And I burnt out on it so fast. I didn't do any journaling for a long time. I just needed to kind of be, because being on autopilot, I'm going to tell you, is way easier sometimes. Oh, yeah. Because you're just going through your day and okay, that's done. Now let's do the next day. It's harder to sit with some of those things. So when I realized I was trying to perfect it and I was trying to go full throttle, stepping back and saying, I'm going to do one thing a week or every other week, or I'm just going to check in with myself every now and then. Or if I'm doing something and it lights me up, I'm going to make a note of it. If I'm doing something that I meet resistance with, I'm going to make a note of it and just make it as simple as that instead of doing all the things.
Right. Because we're going to win it. I'm going to win.
Yes.
I'm going to win at self-discovery and
best at this.
Going to have lots of gold stars.
But why? Like asking myself, why do I need to be the best at this? For what reason? Mm-hmm. So that I can then tell everyone to be a know-it-all? No, I can share my story and be like, this lady thought she was doing all the right things. You don't have to do that. That felt more empowering to me than being like, I'm the expert at all of this stuff. That's exhausting. That doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So just, here are a lot of the things that I've quote unquote failed at that now I've learned so many lessons from. I'm going to share that. And if that helps you, that is amazing. And by the way, Gleam and Pluck and the businesses that I've had in the past, there were things I loved about those businesses. And I've made mental notes of them or I've written it down. These are things I loved. These are things I cannot stand. Right. And I don't anymore. Now that's not a goal of mine. Now I don't have to work so hard to do the thing that I'm meeting with resistance. Instead, I'm writing down all the things that I loved about it. And I can go forward in that direction.
So excited. Yeah. Now you had mentioned music and like concerts being like your happy place. And I know you've done some interviews and posts about music. And I was thinking about that